So this is Architect and Developer, Self-Initiating Your Work. My name is James Petty. I'm here with Alex Barrett, Della, and Peter Guthrie of DDG, Alloy, and Barrett Design, respectively. I run a website called Architect and Developer and Instagram. If you guys are interested in this, I'm always trying to post new stuff. For the conference, they were supposed to give you a handout that I put together a map. If you go to bit.ly/arcdev on your phones, this will load up into your Google Maps app, and it will show you a lot of the projects around New York City that have been developed by architects. There's actually a lot. If you're walking down the High Line, you'd be really surprised to look left and right and find a lot of buildings by these guys and others. And so on that note, start with Mr. Alex. The green goes forward. This is not a microphone.
Does it go, the red goes back?
Yeah.
Hello. Thanks, James. It's a privilege to be here, especially to share the stage with Jared and Peter. So Barrett Design has been around for 13 years, and I started it with the premise that combining architecture and real estate development will improve both. It's our belief that designer-led real estate development is more thoughtful, more meaningful, and ultimately creates more value. And at the same time, it's our belief that architects that sit in the owner's seat are more effective, more disciplined as designers, and ultimately more profitable if all goes well. At this point, my firm is a team of 7, and that's 6 architects plus an office manager. And we approach each of our projects as designers first. And we seek to create the best building that we can within the many constraints that we are faced with, but also guided by a core set of values. To date, we've finished 11 speculative condominium projects, mostly in Brooklyn, but just started one in Manhattan. We have 4 projects under construction at the moment, ranging from as few as 2 to as many as 23 units. And James asked us to speak a little bit about kind of how we structure our projects, and our project structure, at least from a capital standpoint, is pretty consistent over our 13 years, which is we identify a project that has some sort of untapped, uncreated value that we think we can create through design and redevelopment. We raise equity from investors. At this point, all of our equity is raised through individual investors, no institutional equity, so I think that's a bit of a departure from my fellow panelists. And then we raise debt from construction lenders as well, and I think James is going to talk a little bit about that kind of typical capital stack. The process of finding projects is probably the hardest thing for us, and I wish I had a good answer as to how we do it, but it's really by hook and by crook. Brokers at this point are involved in a lot of transactions, but most of our projects have been condominiums. This is a departure for us. This is 2 single-family townhomes in the Columbia waterfront district of Brooklyn. And our first project in Manhattan is about 1/3 of the way through construction right now. It's just off the intersection of East 3rd Street and Bowery, not far from here. And it'll be a 6-unit condominium, about a little less than 20,000 square feet with a retail space on the ground floor. And that's it.
So we have Jared from Alloy.
Green is go.
Green is go.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Jared Della. I'm the CEO of Alloy. Alloy is a real estate development company. About 12 years ago, I had to say I quit architecture. Required a little bit of therapy to go there, growing up and going through architecture school and always imagining that was the outcome. But I felt like when I said that I was an architect doing development, people didn't understand what that meant. They thought it was the light version. And when I said I was a developer, people understood it, but they thought that I was evil and that I had genuinely quit and didn't care. So it was a confusing dilemma that we face, identity crisis, call it. We're sort of like a platypus. So Alloy is a real estate development company, right? And it's funny watching Alex's slides because I feel like each of us could give each other's lecture, certainly the beginning part, which is we distort the use of the word value in our practice, right? As architects, we grow up, we all feel the social contract, the moral obligation, the production of great work in our city, and we sort of believe that architects as developers can make better choices, and we can distort the use of the word value. In our practice, value is not about economics. It is about great architecture first. So our company is very strange. We're actually 6 companies. I shudder to show our corporate tree. I thought about it for a minute, but then I thought this was the AIA, and maybe they might not like it. So we are a development company. That is the holding company. We have a design LLP. We have a real estate brokerage company. We have a construction company. We have a management company. And we have a community development company. We kind of do whatever it takes. We joke. It's sort of like, okay, Alloy TV VCR repair. We typically find that we can solve the problems better than the industry can. So this came, fairly early on in my career where I recognized that, developers are there. They need us early on in the process, and you're there until the end, but we extract very little value from the time commitment and from the value creation over time. So perhaps acquisition and project conceptualization, development of program might not come from the architect. Sometimes it does, and ultimately the management doesn't. But you still get the phone calls, don't we, at the end when something's wrong and it's 2 years later, and we answer, but we get nothing for it. So it was funny, your statistics there. Over the last 12 years, we too have only acquired 11 projects, and you're starting to see a theme here, right? We work on one thing at a time. We have no clients. We work for no one other than ourselves. We provide no services other than to ourselves. And it keeps you focused on what it is that we're doing and how to manage time and prioritize the development process. So right now, only one of those is active. As of the other day, we acquired another one, but it's sort of rare, right? We think about our work a little bit differently. Our office certainly functions differently. And I'll get into that a little bit. So unlike architects, right, we buy properties, we don't look for clients. There's a big difference. We invest the process of how we go about acquisition differently. In the background, you're seeing a piece of software we developed, which is map-based communication tool that we use in our office to identify what we've looked at the past, associate news affiliated with different properties. It connects to all of the zoning data tables and property transaction records that exist in the city, but more than that, it's sort of like a dashboard in our office that helps us identify who have we spoken into the past and what can we learn and see, and it enables us to sort of see information in a different way. This idea came to me in college, actually, in graduate school. This was my graduate school thesis. I had this idea for an architect-led development company that was also a contractor, sort of recognizing that it was sort of a broken industry. So this is my kind of timeline of how this went for me, and I'll get into a little bit about how our office works as well. So as my graduate school thesis in '95, when I graduated school, I graduated with both a master's in architecture and a master's in construction management, and I kind of didn't want to be told that I couldn't do something, but rather that I could learn how to actually build here in the city, and so I worked there for 5 years. While I was at the construction company, we won a design competition with my former roommate from graduate school for a federal plaza project for the GSA in San Francisco. In '98, we had taken on our first job. I was 24 years old, and I just became incredibly frustrated with the process of how we go about getting clients, so I started to pursue development and trying to acquire sites as a way to build work for the practice. And over time, our first project as a developer, we won an RFP with the city of New York for affordable housing. I then helped somebody acquire a property. I then acquired my own property at 459 West 18th Street. In 2011, I dissolved the architecture practice formally And, I had started Alloy in around 2006, and in 2016, Alloy had turned 10, and now we're working on a project that's a little over 1 million square feet. So we've been partners since 2006. We've worked on 12 projects. We've invested about $95 million. That number is really about 110 now of our own capital. We've managed about $430 million in equity. We borrow a lot of money. That's one of the big differences between architects and developers. It's hard to borrow money as an architect. And we're now approaching, 2 million square feet of development, over 1,100 units. This is a funny one. One of the big differences between our practice and an architecture practice is we take a lot of risk. This is a note my business partner left me with one of our legal bills that says "holy shit pies" on it. We're spending about $120,000 a month on legal to manage the opportunities and to rely on different consultants to achieve what we do. And we think about things a little bit differently. This is a change order signed by me as the owner, signed by me as the architect, and signed by me as the contractor. We run our practice a little bit differently, and somehow our bank requires this kind of formalization of the process and the way that our industry has defined the way that we go about things. But we kind of play by the rules, but don't. I don't know why the columns are not lined up here, but there are 4 partners. We have 11 employees and 2 admin, which makes 17. We think of ourselves as like 34 people, though, because everybody in our office is like a Swiss Army knife, right? We're working on one project at once. You might be involved in marketing one day. You might be involved in construction another day. You might be involved in acquisition another day. There's only one person in our office who has any real estate training, right? We're all architects. We have this incredible capacity, and the economics are not rocket science, right? It's how much does something cost and how much is it worth at the end. And we've run our practice that way. So 8 of our employees are licensed architects, right? This is it's been like a gateway drug for people, right? There's a degree of once you're here, you can't imagine unwinding or unscrambling the scrambled eggs and going back to just providing service. So the typical architecture practice works off of a pyramid, right? You have employees, you make money off of those employees. The more employees you have, the more theoretical revenue that you can make. With a development company, we have that too, right? We have something we call Money Day in the office where my partner sends me a bill and then I pay it. We do that for architecture services, for development services, for brokerage services. But more than that, we actually get the value out of the real estate. And so we have these moments where at the end of the project, there's meaningful value there that we've created and achieved that's different, right? We have project return. So how does it go for us? So this is a typical, projects we're working on now are about $100 million as the type of project size that we like. So this is a general sense of how this works for someone like us. We pay ourselves architecture fees. Construction fees, right, including general conditions and other things if we're our own construction company. Brokerage fees, we're doing the sales. Nobody is better at sales than an architect, I promise you. There's no broker who can outsell one of us. And developer fees, right? Pay ourselves developer fees every month. We get a developer draw. And keep in mind, I'm billing the same employees for the same task multiple times at the same time. And at the same time, we get project profits, right? So on one hand, we're taking all of this risk, and it seems a little bit crazy, but if you add all of those numbers up, what is it, 27, 28% of the project? Remarkably, I've created a hedge for risk because the market can go down quite a bit, but I've saved, if I only make my fees, we've still done well, right? So I've protected myself market-wise by taking on all of these roles and ironically assuming risk. So we do things a little bit differently, and I'll talk through a couple projects really quickly. One of the beauties of being, the architect and developer is controlling the message. This is a project we did in 2009 when the world was falling apart. We bought a small loft. We had a modest budget for the project. We had, it was a 30,000 square foot project. We had a loft building. We bought a beautiful building. We had actually tried to buy it a few years earlier, and that buyer fell apart, so we bought it from the bank. And then we hired a children's book illustrator to come in. We gave him, $2,000 and a can of white paint, and he literally painted the floor plans all over the whole building. And that night we sold $21 million in real estate in an evening. We had one apartment left at the end of the night. a sort of super scrappy way to talk about space for people in an existing building. And it was a simple renovation in a historic district. It was one of our favorite projects in a way because it shows this sort of rethinking. Had we dealt with a broker, they would have said, well, you need a marketing brochure, you need a book, you need floor plans, you need all this stuff. And we were like, nah, we're not going to do that. So sometimes we get carried away. We recognized we had a lot of demand for that type of product, and so the next building we brought the children's book illustrator in, and he rode off on his scooter, and he goes, I've got it. This is the perfect idea, and he came back with this, and we were like, huh. Maybe we're going too far. Maybe we need to edit. So, we do have some editing capacity. We landed here. But the controlling of the message and the idea, in this instance, we were selling space in New York City, which is the privilege, right? Large spaces, 3,000 square foot apartments with 14-foot ceilings here in the city, trying to connect people to this idea of space being the most important thing. So the projects like that, right, which are, this is a 35,000 square foot project where we're doing these big apartments where we make certain decisions, some of which I might not make again, where the image on the right, we had a block through building, we cored out the middle of the building, and we repositioned that bulk on top of the building, which is the image on the left, in a landmark district, which has a degree of complexity when you're taking apart a building that was built in the 1880s. But again, another successful campaign. We sold out in 2 weeks with this information, with just an existing building and some very simple collateral. Over time, our projects have largely been in a neighborhood, literally a block from my office. We can't tell whether that's just because we're building a reputation there and sellers are coming to us or because we're lazy. But this is a project we built, again, in our neighborhood, a block from our office. This started our construction company. These are some of the first passive house townhouses that were built here in Brooklyn. They have a ductile concrete facade, and I think taking risks like that, where we think about the history of this neighborhood, which had some of the first reinforced concrete buildings built in the early 1920s by Robert Gare, pre-Brooklyn Bridge, where we take this idea of reinforced concrete, push it to its limits with a product like ductile, create a new townhouse typology that looks more industrial, take the risk on the aesthetic choice to prioritize where we would put value and how those would fit in with an existing neighborhood. And again, how we would think through delivering a product that was unique to the neighborhood by delivering something that was on the edge for sustainability purposes. So this is a joke, but not a joke. We started to get involved in these public-private partnerships, and we were awarded a site through a public RFP in Brooklyn Bridge Park. And we started to really enjoy the early part of sales and marketing. We're trying to figure out what are we going to do here, and we were building inside a public park, and so we decided to build a park in our site while the park was in construction around us. So we planted this big field of flowers, and at the end, we were like, man, we got to take this down before we start construction. How are we going to do that? And so someone in our office was like, we need goats. So I go home that night, and my wife's like, what'd you do today? And I was like, well, I had to find a shepherd to sleep in the field with some goats so that the goats wouldn't get stolen overnight. And so we planted this field of flowers. We brought in goats. I found somebody to sleep in the field with the goats. Unfortunately, one of the goats broke free and started running through the neighborhood, so not everything goes according to plan, but it enabled us to create something that was memorable in the neighborhood, this idea that place and working in a public park is a privilege, and trying to connect that to a place that actually had no address because it was in Brooklyn Bridge Park, so we called it the John Street Pasture. The building itself, we start to jump scale here as a practice. This is a 130,000 square foot building. We understand the sort of historic context of this neighborhood and invert the typical relationship of window typology. In this neighborhood, because you're on the river, the views down low are actually better. They look underneath the bridge. And so we pulled all the windows forward and proud of the building, and we inverted the typical relationship where the windows get smaller. At the top, it starts to create this kind of double take where it feels as if it's part of the landmark district. We build a really beautiful brick building. The bricks actually get smaller as they go to the top as well. And, it changes the nature of the reflection to sort of a clean reflection with a broken plane rather than recessed windows, which is common in the neighborhood. This started our sort of public-private partnership model. We donated a space to the Brooklyn Children's Museum in this. I always joked with my partner that it would be faster for us to donate a museum than it would be to get called by someone to design one, and so we're starting to do that. Community engagement has become a really important part of our practice. We don't spend money on marketing dollars. We spend them on the communities in which we're working. We're working on a large project now in downtown Brooklyn, which is going through a public review process, which is over 1 million square feet. And so during the process of development and while we're pursuing entitlement, we've sponsored now 6 projects. We've spent probably $1 million on early public engagement. We've done everything from create a system for court-involved youth to get diverted out of the court system through arts education. We've donated spaces to not-for-profits and dance and arts organization, created community festivals. It's about this idea of building awareness in the communities in which we work to connect to people. The places we make are for people. We make widgets, right? We're making real estate and we're selling them. But the places we make, we don't want, we want them to be valuable. We want them to have this alternative sense of value where communities can be proud of participating in them and proud of having them as their neighbor. So the project we're working on now has a series of features which we're starting to really leverage density in this instance for scale, for public benefits. So our new project that we're working on, we're donating 2 public schools for over 700 school seats. We're creating 200 affordable housing units. We're donating one of the existing buildings to a cultural institution. It'll be over 15,000 square feet, creating over 3,000 jobs with that. We're swapping our property with the city for more land so that the schools can have large open space features like gymnasiums and auditoriums, which they don't currently have. And the cost of this benefit for our new project that we're working on is over $230 million in public benefit for $0 to the city. So projects like this, and the image on the right is what we're working on, which is a 980-foot tall building with another phase that's 500 feet tall, sort of express to me what our role is as architect, right? We think of architect, I think, in a traditional way where we're providing services for people, but ironically, the further I get away from providing architectural services, the closer I am to being an architect. The definition on screen there, a person who is responsible for inventing or realizing a particular idea or project, is how I perceive art practice.
Thank you. Well done. That's a tough act to follow. I'm Peter Guthrie from DDG. DDG in 2008, and been going ever since. Yeah, around 10-year mark. Didn't think about that. Let's see, we do a lot of the same things, and I agree with Jared. We could probably give each other's lectures. Might be a fun thing to do. Try that next time. We design, develop, finance, construct, and then manage our projects. We're vertically integrated, and this is a horizontal slide. I'm not sure how that works. We're doing a lot. We're building in New York, San Francisco, and Florida, and looking at a project in LA right now. My story starts, I guess I studied art history and sculpture, and then went and took a master's in architecture, and came to the city, and I did a number of things, but I was always interested in making and building, and my passion is that. It's at my core, and I came to the city and worked for a metal worker in Dumbo, so I know your area very well, and that was super fun, working for $10 an hour, shaving welds, but that then led to a job with Peter Gluck and Gluck Plus Architects, for those of you who may know who he is. He was a great mentor, is a great mentor, and so I learned the design build philosophy, I think, from him. I had done what I would consider design build work at Yale. We built a house for for folks in the neighborhood as part of our first year building project, and was a great way to see a building through. I'd worked for Habitat for Humanity while I was at Duke, and I think I had it in my bones that you could really make a difference by getting out in the community, or at least that was the difference I wanted to make. I wanted to get out there and figure out how to get something done. When I moved to Brooklyn, fast forward after working with Peter for a while and wanting to do my own thing, I like Jared, did some work, built a house for a friend, and then had that same sort of feeling of dread of beating the pavement looking for a client. And so I was looking around at buildings in Brooklyn with Federer's windows, these air conditioning units in the windows, and thinking that there has to be a way. What are these guys doing? Like, what's the secret? How could we do a development project? And I started talking to guys in the neighborhood, and it kind of came down to something that certainly wasn't rocket science. And it was like 300, 300, 300. And I thought, well, what's that? You buy it for 300, you build it for 300, and you make 300. And it's kind of, it's that dumb and that simple in a way, really. And so the pro forma was a back-a-napkin idea. You buy it for X, you have to build it for Y, and you sell it for Z, and hopefully you've done your math correctly. I went in, I'd done that already. On a very small scale. I built a desk, I bought the wood myself. I could break it down, and I think all you guys, those of you who've studied architecture, have a great skill set to break problems down to very simple components and not get overwhelmed. And this complex thing that's blurry, and I hope you can't see it specifically, but because it may be confidential. It has a series of parameters, and I have some slide later on which I love. It's my Grasshopper script slide, which is the parametric design thing, which we use, which is fun. But it's essentially the same thing. Architecture and many things in life are a set of parameters and what you do with those parameters. And all these little toggles in here are related to time and money, and lurking beneath all those numbers are choices. And there are a myriad of choices you can make. And that's the fun of it for me. Every day I wake up thinking, what are the opportunities going to be today? In talking to a banker, and talking to an electrician, talking to one of our architects, one of our construction managers, one of our building managers. So this is our first project in Manhattan. It's 41 Bond Street. Okay. So it's a bluestone building, and this is sort of jumping around, but it was in a landmark district. It is in a landmark district, and so we had to come up with this is the building. We had to come up with a way to make a building, a ground-up building, all residential, in this landmark district, and with the auspicious start of being right across the street from Herzog & de Meuron and my old professor, Deborah Burke. And so that was just not where I wanted to start. And I go to the site and I see school groups coming through, and they're all, ogling, oogling, Herzog & de Meuron, who I love their practice. And I know there are many people who don't love that building. I do. I love that building. It's something that I could never make, but I was really inspired. And I thought, well, we got to do something different. We got to just really be chilled out and respectful of this neighborhood, and try not to draw too much attention to ourselves. And so we buckled down and found a material, this bluestone. We had done a building down in Tribeca already, so I sort of had my feet under me, and it was still standing. So I thought, okay, we can keep going. And what we did is take Craftsman, and one of the secret little weapons that we found within all those numbers are the labor. And I agree with Jared. Unfortunately, sort of and we're living it right now on this tower on the Upper East Side, where we're kind of become the concrete contractor. I didn't get into it to want to control every little piece, but you do find that it is to your advantage. And so we had our own masons. We bought the stone, we would ship it down, and we would actually cut it and carve it on site. Not radical craftsmanship, but just a step that's really hard to get in the marketplace if you don't have your direct labor. And it's a rigged thing. By having direct labor, we can pass that profit on to the project itself. We're not taking that profit and putting it in our pocket. We're putting that profit into the project. So we do, that's Mickey over there on the right is putting a door frame in. We did everything on that thing. That was soup to nuts, from the facade. We put in all the windows. We did all the interior framing, all the bathrooms, trim, all the specialty trades. This was a team that I built up over the last 5 years before starting DDG. Again, getting into it from one guy who I hired as my grease, my general conditions, just to go around and help the other trades. And we found that the other trades were not, my door guy was, not making it. He just was not getting the doors in plumb. And so I would ask Juan Carlos to go and fix it. And then suddenly there was somebody else that we needed to bring on, and we became, on the next project, the subcontractor. We did all the framing and all the specialty trades because I got so tired of fixing other people's work, and we found that we were training our own crew. That's Jess drawing on the wall. We like to break down the mystery, and I learned that from Peter Gluck a lot. We really labor over how to communicate, how to break down the barriers of this world of architecture and design and make it something that's more collaborative. And we find that interplay between all of these specialists, or these artisans, we call them, our tradesmen, is essential. And it results in a fantastic and unexpected interplay where our details get better and better. Jared's way ahead of me on this platform. You're in a really admirable place in terms of the community work that you're doing, and we're just stepping into that field. But this was a start for us where we realized that there was something that was happening that was a little bigger than us, and that we could provide a platform, and that platform could be synergistic and be win-win. We built a building in the meatpacking district. We came up with an idea. I just asked a question. We have these wraps, the mesh that goes around the scaffolding, the black mesh. And I just said, what if we did something different? What if we tied that to our marketing? Yeah, okay, well, we could design something. In fact, we designed some sort of thumbprint thing. And then we just asked another question. Who could we partner with? Oh, the Whitney. The Whitney's moving downtown. Does anybody know anybody at the Whitney? And my partner Joe did know somebody, the Whitney, and we talked to them in Kusama. They were having this great exhibition of Kusama. It just so happened that exhibition was coinciding with Louis Vuitton opening up 450 stores worldwide, and we couldn't have imagined a more incredible marketing boon to tie our building to the Whitney cross-branding opportunity. Turns out her studio was on 14th Street, and her dots sort of connect to a hallmark of this building, which are these bricks that you make. And the guy that's making the bricks, and I've been over there making them, as he's taking the mold out around the brick, leaves a little thumb depression in there, and you can see it on the slide on the right. It's so sublime you'll never see it. It's just, that's buried in the wall, and that's this incredible enigmatic touchstone of the human component of these handmade bricks that come from Denmark. And so for me, that little thumbprint connected to Kusama's dots, which were these sort of invisibility shields. .325, again, back in the landmark district, so really fun to take that as a serious, some developers often I think, not these guys, will look at that as another one of these places to try to get around something. Oh, they're smarter. They're going to get under and around and play the system. We took a different tact, and we said there are architects sitting in this room who are going to judge this project, and we took a tact of saying, what if this was a collaborative enterprise? What if this was like a crit back at school? And so we went kind of overboard in making basswood models and looking at the tectonics. This building is in Soho, so it's in the cast iron district. We looked at the history of cast iron, component parts, and thought deeply about it. And we entered into a discussion with landmarks and showed them what eventually becomes a building that I'm drawing my knuckles and trying to find a language of armor and reinventing a language that's connecting to the cast iron district. We end up working with the ZZ Top boys up here. They were awesome. They make Chevy engine blocks in the middle of Pennsylvania. They're fantastic, and they couldn't believe that we wanted a weird burlap texture to our aluminum, and we were gravitating to these pieces in a cart, and they were their rejects. They were so used to military specs, and this is us playing with the modeling and then the finishes, these burlap finishes. This is the texture here. All this craziness was supported by New York City landmarks. It was a fantastic process. It was heady. They had great feedback. They forced us we allowed the process to force us, but they were instrumental in making us try harder and make the details for architects in many ways, and they're not. And so that was fun to realize. It's just sort of a side detail that you can't see here. That was one that stuck out. That they really wanted to look at how the side of the building and our aluminum screen integrated. And I thought, man, that's crazy. The landmarks is totally having a modern architecture dialogue. It wasn't it's not what you would expect. It was sort of knee-jerk, anti. Modern rhetoric that some people or stand that some people expect from landmarks. Our marketing, we take, like the Kusama here, we're partnering with Sean Martinborough, who has just given a TED talk. He's become he's doing something with George Lucas now. He's a noir comic. He's a noir, comic artist. And he was sort of instrumental in helping us find a story. And like what Jared was saying about creating opportunities outside of the traditional selling model, that was the thing that we learned from Kusama. And so in all of our projects, we do partner with other artists or artisans, and we make books that are for them as well. And they're artworks in and of themselves. And then we'll do crazy things like a billboard. So we made characters. This is a story because this was an old chocolate factory, and so we came up with this storyline of these two heroes who have to battle an evil robot and ultimately save the day by saving this chocolate recipe. And I don't know. Somehow it made sense to us. Why not have a little bit of fun? It is tangential marketing. I mean, you'll see this in luxury goods and Louis Vuitton and these Gucci places. Ferragamo had some illustrators do work. So we're riding on that wave. But again, I think that tangential marketing and the spirit of collaboration is what drives us. And we get so much from it. What I didn't show earlier is that Kusama collaboration ended up influencing our grill design. So our HVAC grills in the apartments are this dot matrix that we would never have thought about had we not partnered with her. I'll go quickly. How's the time? Move, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, let's move. So this is a building in Tribeca, more bluestone. I'll blow past that. It was fun. We laid it out in a field in Long Island. And 88th Street, I'll end on this, is a tower that we're doing in the Upper East Side. We do a lot of studies. These are the developer studies, the stacking plans, not just the capital stack, which is important, but the stacking plans of how many units. It's primarily residential with a commercial component on the first floor, and this one was weird. It has this whole amenity package, which turned out to be more or less necessitated by the form. There's a sort of percentage rules in governing that site that sort of forced us into making all these amenities. Modeling, we do a lot of 3D modeling. Here's my favorite Grasshopper script. That is crazy. I love it. This is the mess of the parameters, and then it results in this, which is the fenestration pattern that's actually literally tied to 10% and the different percentages of legal light and air for different rooms, whether it be secondary bedrooms, bathrooms, or living rooms. This is our brick mock-up. This is our artisan, Jan Hoos, who's working in stucco. Again, we like to go macro to micro and find, again, that these very micro collaborations work their way back into the macro. So these are the arches at the top of the building. And we're on the 28th floor, and it's 31 floors, so we're somewhere right over there, and we're getting close. Brick started. The interiors. And last couple slides is just, again, this theme. This is the sales gallery, and just leaving you with this last slide. This is Stephen Quinn on the right, who wrote the book on dioramas. He's foremost diorama authority. He works for the Museum of Natural History, and you go to the Museum of Natural History, and he has a book in there. It's fantastic. We needed to make windows in the sales gallery, and many people often use these digital prints, and we said, no, that's crazy. Let's talk to the folks at the Museum of Natural History. And sure enough, they were really interested in partnering with us, and we made this diorama of Central Park. And for me, again, it's that touchstone of just asking a question: Can you do this a little differently? And if you approach it with some great people and with passion and energy, some fun things can happen. Thank you.
So I just wanted to talk about a few things real quick. What they're doing isn't new. I know the AIA hasn't talked about it for a very long time, but in 1777, John Nash took a lease assignment on a piece of property in London and developed eight units. That was 240 years ago. He later did the Royal Pavilion in Brighton and the Buckingham Palace. That's probably what you're more known for. So how do you do this? I want to try to break this down into a couple of quick steps for somebody who is an architect trying to get into the development field and one day be like one of these guys. The first step is you've got to educate yourself. You need to really take the time to learn a lot. There's a lot of terms that you need to know: the NOI, the ROI, the NPV, the IRR, et cetera, et cetera. You can get a real estate degree, but there's a lot of the universities that are starting to put more of their content online for absolutely free. Coursera, edX, iTunes U are fantastic resources. It looks like it's behind a paywall, but if you work your way through it, it is free. The real estate finance course by GSAP is actually one of the greatest things to start off on. He's great. Pro formas, you need to learn how to read them. You need to learn how to take them apart, put them back together. But really, it's a simple process. It's you buy it for X, you put in Y, and you get out Z in the end. But you need to understand what that process is. Real estate is a debt finance industry. If you have student debt, you need to get refinanced. If you have bad credit, you need to get fixed. You need to put yourself in a situation where when you go to an investor or a bank, they see you favorably and they can give you money. You also need to start putting money together because you're going to have upfront costs for land acquisition, consultants, and entitlements before you're ever going to pull on a construction loan or get an investor to put money into your product. You need to figure out what you want to do. There's a lot of options here. These guys are doing very big buildings that cost a lot of money, but a lot of people are starting out in very smaller ways. There's a couple in Barcelona who lost all their clients in 2008, so they've started buying apartments and renovating them themselves. Now they've decided they don't want clients anymore. They just keep doing this. They've done over a dozen. Jose de la Cruz down in Houston took borrowed money from his brother and his 401k, bought a house for $80,000, put $80,000 into it, sold it for $280,000, all while working at Gensler. So Gensler from Monday through Friday, working on this house Saturday, Sunday, he still doubled his money on this guy. And he's done 2 more, or he's on his 3rd right now. You can do a full new build if you want to really get in there. This is Mike Benkert. He also has a full-time job, and on the side, he bought a $25,000 lot at a sheriff's sale. He works 9 to 5, and on his lunch breaks, he goes and checks on his contractor who's building the project. But it's important for him to keep, this is his 2nd house, he's about to start his 3rd. It's important for him to keep his day job because he needs that day job for the financing. Banks need to know that they're going to get their money. This is the Up Studio here in New York City. They're a young couple of guys that were doing a lot of interior works, but they wanted to do a modern house. Nobody was hiring them to do a modern house, so they just bought a piece of land, they did it themselves. While it was under construction, they had several people walk by, said, I love your house, I'd love to hire you as my architect. Now they have several jobs. They're a legitimate firm, they're making more buildings, and they're onto their 2nd development. Multifamily is tough. What these guys are doing requires a lot of a track record and to be heavily capitalized. This is Kerry Tamarkin. He has a lot of projects on the High Line. They're beautiful. Like I said, if you go to bit.ly/arcdev, you can download a map on your phone. And when you walk down the High Line, you will be surprised at how many of these buildings are actually by architects that are funded by architects. But with multifamily units, pre-selling is a really big deal. So this is a great example of where you can be clever. And to be an architect and developer, you need to set up a lot of entities and a lot of contracts between yourself. Onion Flats was able to get the financing by pre-selling 2 of these 8 units. One of the pre-sales was to the principal of the firm. The second pre-sale was to his mother. It works. It's still a name on a contract. There's money in escrow. So it works. You can also play with your own academic ideas. This is Jonathan Tate down in New Orleans. He started with the little sliver house on the right, which is getting a lot of press lately. While that was under construction, which he developed, he bought the land all next to him, which he only had the right to do, the zoning gave him the right to do 3 single-family houses. He didn't want to do 3 single-family houses. He was interested in a tighter, denser neighborhood in New Orleans. And so he created a co-op on the land, which allowed him to make 10 detached units and create a really interesting little network in what he's calling the starter home. It's sort of an academic exercise for him that's also become lucrative. In San Diego downtown, there's these 3 guys that had a thesis project of making an urban park. So they wanted to do it with no money because they were in grad school. So they raised $60,000 on a Kickstarter to pay for a bunch of upfront fees. They went to the mayor's office, said, look, we got this money. Can we get some money from the city? So the city pitched in, gave them a 2-year lease for cheap on a land that was later to be developed. And then they got some investors. They got each one of these tenants to sign up, and they made the tenants pre-buy their shipping container and pay for Rad Lab's design services. So Rad Lab was like off to the races without really much money in there, and they each pay Rad Lab rent every month. So this is great. What these guys showed you was great, but there's the real reality of the situation, right? So how do you figure out your financing? The truth in real estate is that nobody has money. It's always other people's money. So you need to find investors, which maybe that structure is something where when the money comes back, you give them a 10% preferred return. You split the ways 50-50 afterwards. Maybe you get partners where somebody's coming in, putting in all the money, you're doing all the work, and in the end, maybe you get some money. Or you do a construction loan, which might be some kind of terms of a 4 to 6% interest, although that's getting higher these days. And they will give you up to 70% of the cost of construction. They're not going to give you all of it, which means there's still going to be a gap in there. And that's kind of a problematic because who's going to fill in that 30% gap? Well, that's where you get creative. You use your creative skills to figure out how to create what is called a capital stack. So maybe you go out, and there's a lot of ways to do this, but this is just one way where you get a construction loan, you find an investor to bridge the gap, and you basically, which is a loan on a loan, the risk is higher, but you decrease the equity to 10%. This is a very real situation how a lot of people develop buildings. But how can you even get that equity even lower? I have a few little thoughts that I just wanted to share with you today. One of which is architecture is equity. When you're having all of these different entities, and they talked about it before, you can use your fees as an architect that are early on towards the loan or towards your position in the loan, and banks will recognize that as long as you create a paper trail. Contracts between yourself, payday, money day, as Jared was talking about. Another idea is if you want to take a little bit less risk, if you have an existing relationship with a developer, you can do what Glock Plus did, where we put in sweat equity up into the front end of the project. Basically, the architect worked for no fee for a % stake in the ownership of the project. This is a rental building in Philadelphia, and now Glock Plus takes in a % rent every single month. You got to realize that for a developer, all of the fees up at the very beginning of a project, which is when an architect's working on it, before it's entitled, before you've had public permissions and everything else, is the most at risk for a developer. That's when the architect is the most valuable. So if you're able to work out that kind of agreement, it also means that if the project doesn't go through, you don't make any money. The crowdfunding is a very interesting thing that's going on right now, and there's a couple of reasons why. This isn't like your Kickstarter, it's a little bit different. One of the first actual crowdfunded projects, there's a lot that you see on Kickstarter that never gets built. It's a bunch of wasted money. There's Zeus is a company in Rotterdam who wanted to build a bridge. They raised 100,000 euros by offering to CNC route the names of the donors in the walls. The city was like, great, people actually want this thing. They're willing to put their own money into it, so they put the rest of the money up and they built the thing. But this is the real type of crowdfunding that is going to come into play. So before 2012, in order to be an investor in real estate, you needed to be an accredited investor by the SEC, which meant that you needed to be worth more than $1 million. Since then, the Jobs Act has been passed, and every single year that sort of regulation has been coming down to the average person, so that somebody could invest, a regular person could invest $500 into a project. And that's what Kevin Cavanaugh here did. This is not a rendering, this is a real building in Portland. He spent 15 months and $200,000 in attorney fees to get SEC approval to be able to crowdfund this thing, but he was able to raise $1.5 million as part of his capital stack, which is pretty incredible. And this one just finished a few months ago, and then in December he did a second crowdfund campaign, and he was interested to see if people would take less of a return, investors would take less of a return for a social cause. So his next project is a housing project that subsidizes for the homeless in Portland, and he offered investors a 5% return, which is very low, but within 3 days he raised the $300,000 he was looking for, which proved his point of the fact that people were willing to take less of a return for a social cause. It's pretty interesting. This is the next level. This is Regulation CF of the SEC's Jobs Act, and this is Jonathan Tate again. And a few months ago, he was looking to raise $95,000 as part of a capital stack where it was $95,000 of crowdfunding, $20,000 of his sweat equity as an architect, and $400,000 of a construction loan. Except instead of having to go to the SEC, he partnered with a thing called Small Change. This is a website which you can register on. And they are already an accredited investor, so he didn't really have to do any kind of upfront legal work. He just raised the money, and now he's building the building with very little money, very little of his own money in it. Another program is the FHA. Everybody needs somewhere to live. If you're willing to live in your project, you can actually purchase and finance construction of a building with 3.5% down. That's what Zeke Freeman did for his very first project in Denver. This is his own house, or was his own house. And he got a single loan that was $130,000 for the property, $100,000 for a renovation to do whatever he wanted as an architect, and it cost him $8,000 all in. So the next step is to, you need to understand what the market is, what people are buying, what sells, and what people are missing out. So the best way to do this is to go figure out what other people are doing through open houses. Sorry, Jared. So forget the AIA tours. Jared's house is open on Sunday at 3:45. Guys, this is all public knowledge. Like, just go out there and find the buildings that you admire and go see them.
That's a resale.
For those of you not in New York, look at
Making a lot of money on that.
the mortgage. For those not in New York, that's monthly.
Sorry.
So the final step in this really quick process before you get going is to really try to understand a pro forma. You buy it for X, you put in Y, you sell it for Z. And you need to, you can download some of these pro formas online at Guerrilla Development or architectanddeveloper.com. You need to be able to go through them, take them apart, put them together, make your numbers work again and again and again, because by the time you go to a bank or an investor, you need to prove to them that you know what you're talking about, and you know how to put it, that they're going to get their money back and they're going to make some money in the process. Place Taylor put together this thing. So after that, that's it. You rip off the Band-Aid, you figure out what you want to do, you figure out how much it's going to cost, you look up a site, you organize the finances, you close the site, you get a contractor, and you go make money. When you sell, the loan gets paid back, the investor gets paid back, and you get whatever's left in the end, if there's anything left in the end, which is a risk. And so I think that was what I wanted to first talk about as a panel was with you guys, was the fact that I think most people here can understand that there is a risk to development or to being a developer. I think those risks can be obviously seen as very high, but the upside is very high for a developer, and the low side can be very low. But as an architect, there's also a lot of inherent risks that I think people don't realize they're already taking, where the downside of being an architect on a building can still be very low. You can still get sued and you can still have a lot of problems, but the upside is capped to a fixed fee that has no real position in this kind of game. And so I thought like the whole idea of risks was a good way to kind of start it off, and I was wondering if you guys had anything particular to take. Can we get some lights up here, please? Thank you.
The chances of you not getting paid by your client are higher than they are by you doing a bad job for yourself. So there's a degree of risk mitigation in the reality of having control over your own destiny. Like every day you got to feed yourself, and you know what is right and how you want it done, and what the right thing to do is on a construction site, and how to mitigate that risk. And we just always found our practice had zero value, right? In 2007, 2008, when the world was falling apart, and I'm looking at my partner going, how's it gonna go? You know, like our practice literally from 20-something architects, we were only as good as whether our clients were paying us. So I was like, I'm not doing this again, right? The value of services, unless you have long-term contracts with the federal government or something like that, is practice itself is zero. It's a practical zero. There's no intellectual property to sell, there's no nothing, it's services. So if you're not working, you're not making money. It's not just about making money, obviously, it's about the enjoyment and ownership of the work that we do on a daily basis. So for me, I look at things and it's sort of like, okay, we're gonna push the boulder that way. And that is less risk by a long shot on a daily basis. Just I trust in my partners. When you take risk for people, when you borrow money, there is no worse feeling on earth than feeling like you're going to lose someone else's money. And so it is very motivating, you know? I don't perceive risk in the same way that I think a lot of other people do. I don't perceive what I do to be risky at this point.
I do. I definitely do. And it's such a hard thing, right? I mean, it's such a subjective term, risk. And I feel like the older I get, the longer I do this, the more I perceive risk, the more I feel it, maybe. And you're right, it certainly is a motivator. I haven't set an alarm in about 10 years because I just wake up. I got things to do. I didn't get that done. Yeah, I think one of my kind of aha moments was in 2001 working for a firm here in New York City, and after September 11th, the economy in New York City kind of took a pause, and people were getting laid off in my firm who were talented and hardworking and didn't deserve to be laid off. And I looked around at that and said, that is not the kind of job security I want. And so, like many autodidacts who feel like they can do things that maybe they shouldn't try to do, but want to at least give it a shot, I decided that's what I was going to try to do. And just figured I probably hopefully had a better chance of making it on my own if I were in the driver's seat, the owner's seat, making those kind of critical decisions that in the end create the most value. And I think as architects, even in a traditional practice model, we are making a lot of those decisions that create value in the projects that we work on. We're just not getting the upside like James was saying. And so your upside is always capped in the traditional practice model, and I think that's what we're all trying to disintermediate or fix.
I completely agree. It's the least risky thing to do your own work. That's just, I feel it up and down every which way. Buying a screw myself, watching my guy screw it in the wrong way, take it out and screw it in the right way, learn myself, drew it the wrong way, and I need to figure it out a different way. I can cover all my tracks, I can fix my mistakes. Our building management group, we have a thing called the solutions log, which was awesome. Which is just, learning about our mistakes. And the most risky thing to do is to have your hands tied and be looking at a situation between a contractor and we'll use architecture record and we'll listen to an owner. And we do have some traditional relationships or structures, I should say, and watching those structures result in complete inefficiency and complete risk because nobody's really talking, nobody's really figuring stuff out, and everybody's sort of afraid to make a mistake. We make mistakes risk equation has been massively mitigated by taking it on. And Peter was, fantastic in learning that. We were doing we're trying to get a job at Scarsdale for the synagogue, in addition to a synagogue, and there was a room of really heavy-hitting board members, lawyers, many of them lawyers in the city, and they asked Peter, why would we ever hire you to do the architecture and the construction? And then they started going on about penalty clauses and the way Peter sat there and just went right back at them with the reason it's better for you to put all your eggs in one basket is because I'm going to take responsibility. I'm here. You're not going to have this fight between the architect and the contractor and you guys. And I'm not interested in penalty clauses because unless you want to pay performance bonuses. He went toe-to-toe, and they got the logic, and they saw a man willing to stand up and put it all on the line and risk, but he saw, what that group saw was responsibility. And I think architects take that responsibility too often without the reward. And I think what I learned in that conversation, why you put all your eggs in one basket, it speaks to this risk and responsibility component.
I had a few questions that were sent to me before the conference. Andrew had asked, what's one thing that you wish you knew before your first project? And kind of dovetailing into that was from Carlos asking if you think a real estate degree or a certificate is worth the investment. I know, Jared, you took a B school class, and I think, Alex, you did a certificate at NYU or did some courses at NYU in real estate. Do you think that this is something like if an architect wanted to get into development, it's a prerequisite or worth it?
I don't think it's a prerequisite, but it took me 7 years to figure out how to do this before I really was going at it, and it was doing this at night and looking for real estate at night while I was running my architecture practice, right? It wasn't a hobby, right? Like every night I went home, I worked on figuring out how to do a pro forma. No one ever taught me. So it would have saved me a lot of time. And, it's not how I think about the world. I'm not, intuitively a math person. I don't think in numbers in that way. But you have to understand it enough to build an instinct about when to go back to taking a risk, about when to execute, right? There's a couple of key pieces to line up in order to be effective at it. Having the education is helpful.
We're technically over time, but there's nobody here kicking us out. Does anybody here in the audience have a question they'd like to address? Yep.
Thank you guys so much for being here. This has been amazing. Your work is so inspiring. One question that I had, because we were talking about risk, I know that we see it one way, that being more collaborative and providing more services yourself is less risky. Insurance companies don't always see it that way. Can you talk about that? And just how you combat the risks that they see versus the risks that you see?
I'll take a quick shot at it and pass it off, but our insurance process is insane. Lloyd's of London's our insurer. Every year I fill out this insane group of forms, like, are you an affiliated entity? Do you have an affiliated interest in the project, and how's it go? We've never been sued. We've never had a suit. I think the risk mitigation comes in the quality control of the process. A lot of it is just continuing to bat at it. Our insurability is incredibly complicated. Our projects, of course, have insurance. One of the big ways we guard against lawsuits, I'll offer a little tidbit here, a piece of advice, is we hire a ton of consultants that are the likely people to sue us, to conflict them out of the possible process, and then make it such that they never pass us a single piece of paper. So we hire people to do peer review. We're our own architect of record. We hire all of these architects and engineers to do peer review, but they never send us a single email or piece of paper, so that there's nothing that's ever discoverable. But then they're all conflicted out, and I get the best advice about where they're getting sued on every one of their other projects, so that we know exactly what to do and what to focus on. So we go kind of to the end of the earth to find out how to do it, and we just do the best job that we can. And I think our track record, I've never, in the 20-something years I've been a licensed architect, I've never had a single lawsuit.
And it puts you in rare company, I think. Pretty impressive. Insurance companies, in my experience, and my firm's a lot smaller than these guys, but insurance companies just don't get it. That's been my experience. And I have professional liability insurance as an architect and as a developer. And I try to explain to them why that's beneficial, because I'm not going to sue myself, right? It's never made a difference. You use that a different experience.
No, I mean, the construction management component, you know, we have an umbrella policy, and I would say the construction management component gives us a lot of coverage, and being wrapped in with that has protected us. But we have not been sued either, and that's a testament to the management. I'd like to say that we build so amazingly. I think we build pretty well, but we also get in and fix problems, and we are face and we're responsible. So if somebody does complain about something and there's a legitimate issue, we're right there solving it, and the track record really helps. But insurance is a costly piece of the puzzle, but it's by no means something an impediment to doing this.
Another question? Yep.
How do you deal with the gain taxes? The condos, ordinary income, 65%.
Yeah, we often take, my partners and I often take real estate back in lieu of money at the end of a project. So, you know, 1 John Street, I took a couple of units, and I can refinance them tax-free, and as long as they never become inventory, you can change the nature of the gain, and then in a handful of years, you can do a 1031 tax-free exchange if you want. You can sell them and change the nature of the gain to, you know, from being ordinary income. So there are a lot of ways. It, again, goes to that legal bill. I have tax counsel, very smart, every deal is different, but we also like the ownership in it, because to your point, you do hear about an experience. One of our partners owns something in every one of the developments we've had, and being there, we're often on the board. Being there often gives confidence to the buyers, which is what makes it harder for them to sue, because we're a member of the community as well. If they have a problem with hot water, we have a problem with hot water. And so there's an immediacy to the management of how you go about treating the buyers, which is very different. And so some of the tax management is also risk and liability management. Just having, the word I use is visibility on everything that's happening beyond the completion of the project, so that we continue to be there.
Yeah.
I was surprised to learn that you also got involved in construction as part of your corporate setup. Was that just a natural evolution? Because, I mean, I think we came expecting to see architect and developer, but kind of surprised to see architect, developer, contractor, but property manager also, or where does it lead?
Well, I mean, take that through from the start. I think we start with the design. For us, really, we start with the acquisition and financing component, and then you have to design it, and then you have to build it. And I never set out to build it necessarily, but the thing that I learned really early on with Peter is, and Jared sort of touched on it in his slide on percentages. In construction, there's something called profit. In architecture, there's no such thing. So we learned that we could finance the architecture, or at least I did that before I started DDG. I started my own design build firm in Brooklyn and did a number of developments there, and one in Manhattan. And yeah, the construction management has a financial component, and then it feeds on down the line. Then for Peter, as it was for me, was a quality control device. So suddenly you're not arguing with a contractor, you're telling your own contractor how to do it, or you're learning from your contractor how best to do it, and you're changing your drawings, and you're having a really good collaborative and efficient work process. So for me, it was it's just super logical, Now, I was laughing as you pushed the mic this way, because we were talking to me the other day about maybe getting out of the construction side of things, and I'm with you. It's really challenging. As you get scale, so our Upper East Side Tower, we really, I'm not joking, but the contractor, there are very few non-union, that job is non-union, not just ended up that way, not opposed to doing union work, but and do it. But that job, we had a non-union sub, we have a non-union sub that's sort of not performing, and what do? You know, you're building a tower, and you have neighbors after you, and the city's after you. You get in there, you start buying the rebar, you start figuring it out. I mean, we literally buy all the rebar. We've hired the staff to come in to be the job foreman, you know, the formwork foreman, and it's crazy, but we are essentially a concrete company. The original contractor has about 3 guys there. We never wanted to do that, but we got to build this thing. We got to get out of it, and we are. We're on the 28th floor, and we're in 5-6 day cycles, which is challenging given that we didn't want to get in there. But so you do what you have to do. I guess eyes wide open. In other situations, we will choose not to be the contractor, and we're getting to a place in our and also possibly not the designer. So we've done some projects in San Francisco where we partnered with other architecture firms, and we find that again, in the spirit of the greatest efficiency and collaboration, there doesn't have to be a one size fits all.
We're being told that we've got to close it down so that you guys can get to your next seminar. Thank all of our panelists for being here. Thank you guys. I know.